Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow us, likes, double tap.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta. We had a great interview last week. We have an awesome interview this week.
Yeah, we're really blowing and going with people who are out in the community doing things. So I think that's something we've always aspired to do, like motivate people.
Yeah.
And I think just ourselves motivating people is something we've done, but the people we've had on lately,
Been super inspiring.
Yeah. I people walk up to me all the time. Oh, I heard you with the interview and wow, she's amazing.
Yeah.
I've been getting a lot of that this week.
Yeah, Lainey Halls was awesome with Keller ISD. We'll share an update with you guys. So a lot of you who are new because maybe you came with the interest of understanding Keller ISD, Ann and I, for the last several years, have been doing this journey of the 817 podcast to inform people about what's going on in the news. Our belief is we'll spend 10 hours a week reading all the things that are going on and then create a 1-hour show for listeners to get the top 3 stories, and then we have a big story and then wins and losses every week. So the goal is that in an hour of waking up Monday morning, driving to work or driving to drop the kids off to school, you can get the insights you need about Fort Worth, Texas, Tarrant County. A little bit of our background. I live in the east side. And
Southwest Fort Worth, I guess.
But Ann's also was city councilwoman for 7 years, ran for mayor, has a lot of insight, lived here for 30 years with a lot of insight, urban planning background. So we've been doing this for 2 years together, but it's been around for 5 years that we had an additional co-host. So I say all that to say, like, we're really excited for anyone who's new, and really what we try to do is get all the information that we have and then give it to you in an hour every week so you can stay informed and active. But I don't know how you feel now, Ann. After just 2 weeks of our new president, I need people to go from listeners to leaders. I need to be jumping off the couch.
People are jumping off the couch. I think I've been hearing from more people that are like, wait, what is happening? Wait, what is going on? What is being proposed? How is this impacting people that I love and care about? Which, you know, when you look at it, that's often what motivates people.
Oh, yeah.
Is when it starts to affect them personally or someone that they love personally, and that seems to be happening a lot lately.
Yeah, I'm loving the there's like the Republicans who are trying to, like, they're on this razor sharp edge of just like acting like all of this is a good idea. They're like, oh, this is exactly what we wanted. Like, this is exactly the plan. To them, like, being a nervous wreck. Like my dad, me and my dad had a convo, and my dad, you know, votes Republican, and you know, my dad has had the privilege of working remote in government. So he's like living in Philadelphia, taking care of his parents, living in Puerto Rico, like while being able to work. But due to the new executive order, all government employees have to come in person. And so, like, this fun that my dad has had for 2 to 3 years, he now has to go in the office 5 days a week. But talking to my dad about it was just like so hilarious. Like, he was trying to act like it was okay, and like, this, it was great while it lasted, but it's what our country wants. And he's like, I only have till 2026 until I retire. And he was just trying to make it sound all perfect.
This was all his plan.
Yeah, and he's like, yeah, this is great. This is exactly what I wanted. Like, just like, and I'm like, yeah, like, it's amazing how you would have been responding if Biden would have made you do this. You'd be raging right now. So it's just funny how they go from crazy for eggs, and now they, their guy is making them go back to the office for 5 days. So anyways, it's little things like that I've seen happen to conservatives in Texas, and they're like, oh yeah, this is what we wanted, right? Like, this is it. So
I have to admit, not wanting to be like triggered every time I looked at the news, I haven't followed every like executive order as it's come out. My philosophy has been kind of like, wait until things settle down a little bit, wait until the analysis has occurred, and then go read about it on kind of trusted sources, and not just respond and react to every little thing that pops up. Because half the time people's first analysis is, I don't know what this means. And clearly some of these executive orders, they didn't know what it meant, because clearly some of the responses were to shut down completely some really important things. My son works at a hospital, and the whole hospital was like, are we going to even be able to continue to do this research that we're doing? How much of it is federally funded? So that, as much as it's kind of a privilege for me that I don't have to be like on that razor's edge that you're describing, because it's not impacting me exactly directly, I think it's healthy for my mind to not just respond to every single little thing and read it as it's coming out, but try to go back and find, which is kind of what we try to do for all the people who listen to the pod, that they don't have to read every article.
Yeah, and I think the tough thing, what I'm learning just 2 weeks in with Donald Trump, and sorry guys, we have not gotten to the 3 stories yet, and we will get there.
This is just a little riffing at the beginning.
We're letting you guys get to know us who maybe are new. So, but at the end of the day, like the part of the Trump, like I forgot how much boring the news was and how like normal life was. And like Trump makes everyone interested into the news. That's one why I think the media companies have maybe like they feel like their work matters more. But like the amount of people who send me articles who usually don't read, it's just like fascinating. Like I feel like I've become the go-to people in my community or of friends because they know I've been like this forever. And like now they're like, oh, we get it. And it's just, but like Trump just does that to people. Let's go ahead and like dive into some ways it's impacted Fort Worth, because I think a lot of our 3 stories are about that. What we've also seen is, so we're going to talk our 3 stories. Number 1, we have an election coming up. People are still filing for seats. And so you're seeing more people come out to register to run for office. It's due February 14th. So we're going to talk about that. Our second story is we're going to talk about the impact of ICE agents on Fort Worth ISD students, as we had an incident in Northside High School. And then we're, of course, going to give updates about what happened on Keller ISD's Thursday meeting, where they had over 200 people asking to speak, with one of those being Commissioner Elisa Simmons. Then our big story is something that I've been wanting to make happen for a long time, and that is sitting down with the Tacketts, Mendi and Chris Tackett. Mendi Tackett does a lot of investigating around Christian nationalism and what does that agenda look like in Texas. And Chris Tackett does a ton around where does the money go in the deep pockets of Texas, and he has great graphs, and they both run a great Substack that allows for a lot of great data to keep us informed. So we have the privilege to sit down with them to really get that. They're going to talk about the importance of school boards and things like that. So we have a full list for you, but Ann, give us who is running. What do we know about elections today?
So we have a local election coming up in May for mayor and all of council, because in Fort Worth, everybody's up at the same time. So all of the council districts 2 through 11 are up, as well as the mayor's office. And we just pulled up the listing where everybody who has either filed for a place on the ballot or put in place their campaign treasurer, which are the 2 documents that you file first when you're planning to run. And there are 7 people who've already signaled that they're running for mayor, 4 people for District 5, 3 people for District 9, 2 people for District 2, 4 people for District 6, 1 for District 10, 2 for District 3, 1 for District 7, 2 for District 11, 2 for District 4, and 2 for District 8. And there are others that we have heard are running that are not even on this list. So, like you said, they have until February 14th to file. And some of them, like in District 8, the incumbent hasn't filed yet. So we assume that that's happening.
But Nettles has,
Nettles has signaled that he is going to run again.
Yeah, and so some of the big news around here that's important of all those numbers that you just heard is District 6, Councilman Jared Williams has opted out of rerunning for that District 6 seat. That became a shocker to so many people because he was the youngest council member. Plus, he was he upsetted, not necessarily upsetted, but he defeated an incumbent, Jungus Jordan, for that spot. It gave Fort Worth a Democrat progressive on council. And so him being gone was a blow to just momentum. And so I think we will eventually one day have Jared Williams on the pod to just hear more about just what he thinks based off of his experience. But it seems like he's backing one of the candidates. And then we have Dr. Hill as well.
Yeah, Dr. Mia Hill is one.
Mia Hill's running. And so Mia Hill ran against Jared. So she's running now.
And she also ran for county commissioner.
Yes. So I feel like
she serves on the Crowley School Board.
Yeah, and so does the other gentleman. What's the other gentleman?
Daryl Davis.
Yep, Daryl Davis, who Jared is endorsing. So that's going to be a race. District 5 is the other one because Gina Bivens is retiring and Gina Bivens is moving on. And so that race is going to have some candidates. And I think there's one person who was on the regional water district who's now took down that seat. A little news on the regional water district. It looks like Leah King is the only one who's actually keeping everyone else is open.
They're not all up at the same time though. Those are staggered. Yeah. So
2 of them are leaving, which I think I know one of them is for the District 5 seat.
Right, Mary Kelleher.
Yep. And then, but then you also have Deborah Peoples running for District 5.
Right. And then we've heard about a couple other people who were going to run for District 5 that haven't filed yet. So we'll see if that actually materializes. But currently there are 4 people who have filed to run for that seat.
Yep. So those are the exciting ones that seem to be big, but 7 people running for mayor.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I hadn't looked at the list recently, and I knew that there were 2 on there previously, but I hadn't looked at it recently. And when I just pulled it up before we started recording this pod, there were 7 people. And, I go down the rabbit hole of like looking at all of their filings and seeing, what part of the city they live in and who their campaign treasurer is and if I know them. And that sort of thing. And I haven't done all that yet because, like I said, I just realized this morning that there were 7 of them. So there's a little more rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. And but yeah, so we'll kind of keep you guys updated. Obviously, any candidate really who listens to the pod who wants some type of space, we will do our best to make that happen. However, also know that last time we've done like District 11 debates or like I guess showcases, and those went really great. But usually those come out of just natural momentum. So if anyone's looking to do something like that, just let us know for either 6 or 5. That's something we would be up to doing because I know there's more candidates than weeks that we can be able to service everyone and still give everyone the news. Yeah. Cool. So we're going to move into short story number 2. One of the horrible judgments that our new elected president made was around eliminating the Department of Homeland Security's policy that previously limited where federal immigration arrests could happen. The Department of Homeland Security's new directive rescinds the Biden administration's 2021 guideline for immigrations and custom enforcement and custom and border protection law enforcement, which so-called sensitive areas like churches and schools. Now those are areas that and hospitals that are allowed to be attacked by ICE agents and people looking to live up to Donald Trump's agenda of deporting millions of people. So obviously in Fort Worth, where we are a majority minority city, plus the state is majority Hispanic, this impacts Texas. And traditional Hispanic high school, Northside High School, which we all know and love as a great school and a great community, already has had incidents with the challenges that has happened there. Fort Worth Independent School District is dealing with the social media posts that came from a substitute teacher. That substitute teacher seemed to have put a post on X that says, "Y'all should come to Fort Worth, Texas, to Northside High School. I have many students who don't even speak English, and they're in 10th, 11th grade. They have to communicate through their iPhone translator with me. The U.S. government should totally overhaul our school system in Texas, too." That is the direct comment of a substitute teacher in Northside High School. And so Roxanne Martinez says here, "Please be assured that we're taking the situation very seriously and are committed to resolving it as quickly as possible." We haven't heard too much updates from outside of this situation. But what you're also seeing, like because this impacts so many people. From a positive perspective, it's like I said, I think people are waking up and getting up off their seats and going from sideline listeners to leaders and activists. So you also saw hundreds rally across DFW to show support for immigrants protesting ICE raids. With to me, the largest protest I believe I've seen or felt inspired from since George Floyd and those movements here. So definitely some activism is happening across Texas. And what is your kind of overall analysis on kind of what you're seeing the impact this can have on our community?
Well, I saw both the principal of Northside speak up and say that, it's their job to make sure that there's a positive and supportive environment for all students, and that they were not asking. Fort Worth ISD's policy is not to ask people about their immigration status. So I think, and that they're investigating the specific tweet that was made by a substitute teacher. So I felt like that was a positive response. I think that there, like you said, that there's been some protests, and one of those protests included a high school students walking out of a North Texas school protesting the immigration crackdown. So we've got young students protesting as well. I think there was a protest in Dallas on the bridge, and then there was also a gathering of folks down on West 7th in Trinity Park, and then marching into downtown Fort Worth. And the articles that I read basically indicated that there was a lot of support for the folks that were doing that, with people honking their horns to show support and solidarity with people. I think that what keeps resonating for me is that people keep pointing to the fact that Trump is saying that he's only going to be arresting criminals. But clearly, the definition of criminal to him is if you've come into this country some way other than a legal way. But that's not the same as criminals that have been arrested for, breaking laws within this country. But clearly, he thinks that anybody who has come in that way is someone who should be targeted. So I think was eye-opening to some people who didn't think that maybe some of their loved ones would be targeted because they're not, arrested and in jail and easily found and shipped somewhere. I mean, I think it's really important that folks know what their rights are. So if they're approached in any places that they're out and about in the community, that they know what they should and shouldn't say, because it's not required that you share your immigration status. I think there's been some articles that I've read that talked about people who were targeted and approached and, didn't have a driver's license or didn't have paperwork that proved anything. And so they were saying, be careful about that, but that you should just know your rights and not just hand over or freely divulge this information, because without the proper paperwork, they cannot pursue you. And so I think it's, we should find some resources and attach them in our show notes, because I'm not clearly recalling exactly what the recommendations are, but I know that those recommendations are out there so that folks know their rights.
Yeah, and some that I'm seeing is that schools have no obligation to assist ICE agents without a valid judicial warrant signed by a judge, not just the administrative warrant. School staff should direct ICE agents to the main office, not provide any student information without a valid warrant, document everything that occurs, including the agent's name, badge numbers, contact the school district's legal team immediately. What their recommendation for students is: remain calm, stay in class, not provide any personal information, contact trusted adults or legal. Like at the end of the day, like we have a massive like chronic absenteeism issue in Texas. And now if you're a mother or a parent who is worried about your kid in a state where we are majority Hispanic people, like we educate 1 of every 10 public school student here in Texas. And odds are they're a Hispanic individual. And you're worried about absences as a
literacy.
And it's just like, this is like painfully bad. And the other part why this is painfully bad, I mean, just from like being anti-immigration is, for all these Republicans, is being anti-capitalists. Like the United States relies on immigration, migrants, to meet over 70% of its agricultural labor needs. Nearly 1 in 5 worker on dairy farms is an immigrant. Like, guys, like, we talk about tariffs being bad to the price of things. When we start losing the people who actually do the stabilized jobs in our country, things that that's when you're going to really feel inflation. I mean, and it's just ironic that it's coming at a time where, immigration is more essential than ever. When you just talk about like the difference of like natural born people, like back in the global fertility rate was 5.3 births in 1963. It's 2.3 in 2021. And in places like Japan and Greece, like 40% of their population is going to be 65 and older by 2050. And 30 of the largest economies in the world suffer from labor shortages for unfulfilled jobs, estimating to $1.3 trillion loss in GDP in 23 alone.
And sometimes people's response is, "Oh, good, the wages are going to go up."
Yeah.
That's all going to cost everybody more too.
Yeah.
So and the other issue is, and this came up previously when there were crackdowns like this, is that this also makes populations not call law enforcement when they are victims of crime. And that's something that our police officers even say they don't want to see happen. ICE's job is ICE's job, and they don't want to be involved in this because they're here to protect the community and make sure that everybody that lives in this community is safe. And if people in this community don't feel safe calling the police, that doesn't allow them to do their job.
Something that's a common theme in Trump's agenda is unleashing the golden era of the economy, of energy, and then safety, because he's going to deport people. But like, there's things we have to understand is that our country is, from an economic standpoint, is doing fine. The powerhouse of the United States from an economic powerhouse. All right, like according to the Foreign Affairs, like an article that's in the Foreign Affairs, it's in its recent edition, says the United States is 26% of global GDP. All right, that is 26% of all things in the world that is of value. We're 5% of the population, but 26% of the GDP. In 2008, after the financial crisis, we were nearly equal to Europe in that stat, and now it's roughly 30% larger. And that is what we have to understand, is that all of this is because of our ability to be able to have a dynamic demographics, due to also being one of the few modern countries with a healthy influx of new people coming in. And so because of that healthy influx, we're able to have a younger population. We're able to have a more robust economy. And so like, I think what I'm like disappointed in, it's like, if all these countries had their weapons come into America, like let's just say, these guns and all these weapons just grew feet and started walking into our country, I think America would be like, yeah, we're going to take everybody's weapons. That's going to make us more powerful. And I feel like if there's humans from all across this world craving to come into our country to take advantage of what this country offers, to me, it's just disappointing that I don't understand anyone who says they're quote unquote a capitalist, that they are also anti-immigration. So
I think that a lot of it is they couched it in a way to like say they were going to be deporting criminals. And so then if you're saying, oh, I'm against that, then you sound like an idiot, because you're like saying you're against removing things that could be dangerous. But when they define being criminal as just basically everyone who has come to this country, even if they haven't broken laws here, then that's a nuance that's harder to explain. And so then they get that soundbite that then makes the people who might stand up and say something against it worry about what that looks like. And so then they don't. Not to mention that you just then put a target on your back from people who go around doing vengeful things.
I mean, this immigration stuff in Texas has gotten so bad that Luka Doncic had to leave Texas. That's how bad this has gotten. No, but on all seriousness, like the immigration of people into the United States, what separates us as a group. All right, our migrant communities are essential to our retail, food, services, agriculture, and healthcare industries. And so because we have an influx of 1 million immigrants, United States is the only great power whose prime working age population is projected to grow throughout this century. So if you look at other powers like China, they're expected that from their ages 25 and 49, their population is going to drop 74% by the end of this century, where we're expected to grow at the end of this century. You look at Germany, 23%, India, 23%, Japan, 44%, Russia, 27%, all declines. So this immigrant communities that support and believe in the American stack of prosperity is the thing that separates us and allows us to be the global economic power that we are. We're going to move into short story number 3. Short story number 3 is just an update on Keller ISD school board meeting. Again, we had Lainey Halls, a mother of 4, on our pod last week, talking about really the storyline from A to Z of how we got to this position. But we look to seem like there has been some consciousness of consideration, just based off of kind of the power and what happened at that meeting. They had twice as many people signed up to speak, and it seems to be that more leaders are standing up.
Yeah, the original meeting that they had, overwhelmingly the people who spoke were opposed to, or at least saying, hey, we don't know exactly what this would cause, but we'd like to have more information before we make a decision. But the majority, definitely. The second meeting they had, it seemed clear that they had gotten some folks that were on the side of doing the split to come show up, because there were a few more folks that were there saying that than had been at the first meeting. So that looked to me to be like the folks who want this to happen told people, hey, if you want this to happen, you need to come and speak up. But even in those conversations and even in those speakers, most people seem to be opposed to this not letting anybody vote situation, and that is, setting a very bad precedent. I think that there is an article in the Star-Telegram entitled "Let These People Vote. Tarrant County Commissioner Speaks Out on Keller ISD Split," which is interesting because Elisa Simmons, her district doesn't cover this area, and there are 2 commissioners who do have constituents in this area that haven't spoken up or didn't come to this meeting, and she's the one that kind of showed up and is speaking for constituents that maybe aren't even hers. But her point was, let these people have a vote. They do not want this district divided, and they're eager to be heard, and they're basically begging you guys to allow them to be courageous in your leadership, and this isn't that hard. You should definitely do it.
Elisa Simmons has always been a gold star to this pod in the sense of like the work she's done across the county. But she was placed in number 180 of the 250 and waited around for 3 hours for her chance to speak. So it's just like the type of person who is really about the people, right? Like their Commissioner Matt Krause has been nowhere, and all he's done is say, hey, based off of the interpretation of law, they're allowed to do this.
Yeah, it's interesting because they said that David Lowe was in Austin because, they're in session down there. So Representative David Lowe from North Richland Hills posted a picture of himself watching the meeting on TV in his office in Austin and said he appreciated the residents of Keller ISD taking the time out of their busy week to make their voices heard, and he was proud of his community. A staffer from his office who attended Thursday's meeting said that the representative plans to submit a bill to clear up the language of the education code that has caused confusion in this process. The bill aims to explicitly require a public referendum on a split no matter how the process is initiated. This is what happens in Austin. They literally pass bills frequently that have areas that need to be clarified. And then they only meet every 2 years. And so while this one has been in place for a really long time and never has been interpreted or utilized in the way that this group of people is trying to do it, there are ones passed every year that are weird. And then people go, oh, that wasn't what I intended. And then they have to wait 2 years to fix it. So I just think it's so messy.
Yeah. Manny Ramirez, a Republican, has also previously called for the board to put the split to a vote if that's what they're looking to do. Looking at it from like, again, I think one of the most confusing parts of it is like the motive, right? It's like, what's the motive? And some people say it has to do with finances, but looking at it, another article from the Star Telegram, former leaders at Keller School District made unrealistic assumptions and overestimated attendance and revenue projections, leading to a $35 million shortfall in the general fund, according to an independent audit. The district hired Chicago-based RSM consultant in May 2024 to perform a budget compliance review in response to deficits, irregularities, and recent employment change in central office. The Keller School District is expected to begin the 2025-2020 school year with $9.4 million deficit stemming from increased expenses and declining revenue, that later, which is largely the result of decreased student enrollment and low per pupil funding. As we know, the state has held public school hostage due to Abbott's obsession with the voucher program. So we have still not raised the per student amount that we give schools, which is held tight at $6,160 per student, and that hasn't changed since 2019. Think about all the things that has happened since 2019 that has made every single one of our pocketbooks and or purses or wallets more expensive to just live as people. Can you imagine running a school where you have to keep buildings warm, keep lights on, modernize buildings, all these things, and you have not gotten an increase? And estimates show that at minimum that Texas should increase their per student model by $1,400 just to maintain with the abilities that schools had in 2019. So this is a serious thing, and you see Arlington ISD dealing with this. But let's be clear. What you learn here is that regardless of the split, you still have this issue. That's where I think like anyone to say that splitting
Is
will
going to
solve
fix
this
anything.
is ridiculous as well.
It's like back against the wall desperation instead of attacking the problem at its root.
There's a lot here that we can continue to update with around the impact this has. Because remember, when Lainey spoke, she talked about how if this law gets interpreted this way and doesn't go to a vote, it can come for other schools. And one of the things that I am loving of our 817 Gather group, so for those of you who this is your first pod, we have the 817 podcast. It's a Monday morning show that keeps you informed and updated about what's going on in Fort Worth as you start your busy week changing the world. But just last year, we started to do what's called an 817 Gather, where we allow listeners and people who have kind of progressive worldviews and want some change in Tarrant County and Fort Worth to come together. And so we meet every third Sunday. But last Sunday, when we had the meeting, we decided to also create a Discord. And this Discord server allows us to talk to each other. And even though we're small and mighty right now on our Discord, I feel like we've learned a lot from just citizens doing citizen journalism. And one of our constituents on here showcased how he believes like what they're trying to do could happen at Mansfield. And that was, to me, an interesting. He's like how it starts at Keller, but he was showing how this True Texas project has a path to progress, restoring conservative leadership in Mansfield. And the keynote speakers were Tim O'Hare and Sheriff Bill Wayborn. It was at Fat Daddy's in Mansfield, and it's February 20th. And so they're going to discuss discover ways you can support conservative candidates for the Mansfield School Board and City Council. And so when you remember what Lainey was saying, it's how Patriot Mobile and all the PACs that are backing her school board, they all won their seats, which now allows to lead to this situation. And so school boards and school board seats are really important to being that safety net to things like this occurring across the state. And so if now you're seeing infiltration in other suburbs of Fort Worth and a part of the county, who is next? Is Arlington next? Is Mansfield next? And so I think as we get ready for this big story with the Tacketts, where we're going to talk about the importance of school boards, why people need to get involved in their school boards, and where the money is going, I think couldn't be a better time going, 1A with Lainey Halls and now 1B with Chris Tackett and Mendi Tackett to talk about school boards.
Yeah, and I think to your point about people getting involved in citizen journalism, as you called it, people sharing articles with us on our Discord, Fort Worth Report is starting a program called Fort Worth Report Documenters, and they are training people to training and paying residents to document local government meetings with notes and live tweets. The Fort Worth Report and the City Bureau, a nonprofit Pulitzer Prize-winning newsroom in Chicago that pioneered documenters and is expanding it across the U.S. newsrooms, launched the Fort Worth Report documenters in early 2025. So we'll share that article as well, because this is a way that those of you who are getting interested in what's going on and believing that we need to have more news about the things that are happening at these meetings where policymakers and electeds are making decisions that affect your children's education, your daily life in the city. These reporting organizations don't have enough staff to be at all of these things. Now, I did have somebody caution that if you're going to go around and have an opinion about some of this stuff, you can't go be the documenter at that meeting and then go have a hot take opinion about that. So the documenters have to be going through this process, training and then learning how to share that information. But it's a really good way to elevate these things so that more people can know kind of what's going on.
Yeah, and I think people like the Tacketts have been great examples of citizen journalists. They run a blog called seeitnameitfightit.com. They're super, I like to say, micro-influencers in the sense of Texas politics on TikTok, X, all over the internet in different ways. Christopher Tackett was also a school board trustee. He is someone who I believe really focuses on the money and where does money go in Texas. He has great stories about that. And then Mendi Tackett, his wife, she really focuses on speaking out against Christian nationalism. So we're going to talk about the whole gamut of what's influencing Texas politics with these two. So here is Chris and Mendi Tackett. So what is your Fort Worth story?
Well, I think if we have the ability to both give a little bit of story, for me, it was my parents moved us to Texas in 1981. I was halfway through the fourth grade, and we didn't come to Fort Worth. They moved us to Granbury. But it was one of those, Fort Worth was always the big city that was there. And one of my earliest memories of Fort Worth is sitting in line outside the UA Hewlin 10 movie theater in the last weekend in May in 1983 so I could go see The Return of the Jedi. I mean, that is just crystal clear in my brain. And then even going to school in Granbury, through high school, Fort Worth was always this place. In the early 90s, it was hanging out on Magnolia at Mad Hatter's Cafe, seeing how many different bands I could see on any given weekend. But for Mendi and I think our story really connected. We both grew up in Granbury, but met in Fort Worth. We got married in 96 here in Fort Worth, bought our first house just in the TCU area in 96, lived here for a number of years, left to chase my career, and came back in 2008, and Fort Worth has been a huge piece of what we've done. And we moved back permanently as soon as our youngest daughter graduated high school, which was 2022, and we knew we had to get right back here to Fort Worth because it was always that place that we knew we felt comfortable, and it was the place that Mendi and I wanted to be.
Yeah, I guess I would say my earliest memories of Fort Worth were being like, the kindergarten school trips. I actually started school in Toller, which is a tiny little farm town on the other side of Granbury. Um, and we had our whole school had three buses, like that was K through 12, and they would load the elementary students up, and we would come to Fort Worth to go to the zoo. And so I remember coming to do that, and Fort Worth seemed like such a big bustling place at the time. But yeah, Chris and I started our married lives here, and went to school here, and college and whatnot, and so it's a place that we've always felt. It's always kind of felt like small town vibes with big city amenities, and we've always liked that about Fort Worth and Tarrant County. So it's always been a place that we felt very comfortable. Aside from, certainly trying to reestablish back in Granbury for a number of years, but we were happy to come back to Fort Worth when our daughter graduated.
Yeah, I would love to know now from what you see of Fort Worth and what you remembered of Fort Worth. What do you tell people from all your travels what Fort Worth is like? What do you say?
I think Mendi kind of touched on it a little bit with it is a place that, again, nobody has any clue how big Fort Worth is, right? I mean, as I work around the country, talk to people, it's like, wait, how big is Fort Worth? This idea that we're just this little podunk, space. It's really about Dallas. It's not about Fort Worth. They have no clue. And so, I talk about one, the incredible, arts scene that we've got going on, the food, the great restaurants and the things you can dive into, just all of the things that you want in a big major city without the feel of that. Now, as Fort Worth has continued to grow and grow fast, you lose just a little bit of that, as the roads get a little more crowded and everything else.
Yeah, I think it's like the Visit Fort Worth would always say they do these surveys, and people thought that Fort Worth was like a 40th or 45th in size compared to all the cities in the country, and it's 12th. And so, to your point, that's what people think. So it does take those of us who are here and love it to kind of share our experience, to educate folks as to what is Fort Worth.
Yeah, and what I would love to hear, how do you guys get to the moment where we're going to discuss today? So we're going to talk about some of our three stories that we addressed. We did, obviously we're in the middle of who's going to run for mayor for the district seat. So we did some highlights on that today. We talked about ICE and the social media posts about a substitute teacher in Northside High School, and then we talked to update about Keller ISD. So I feel like your guys' work really kind of hits a lot of this, and it's a great part two to the part one we had earlier with the mom of 4 Keller ISD students. So give me what is your guys' expertise or passion and insights, and how'd you get there? And I know you guys come from it in different angles, and so we're really excited to have both of you.
Well, I'll dive in with some of the public education push. When we moved back to Texas in 2008, I, of course, in Granbury, Texas, I got involved in the local community, ran the baseball and softball association for about 5 years, trying to make things better for youth sports, right? And did that. And Mendi had the bright idea of saying, you should run for school board. And I was crazy enough to say, sure, let's do that.
I don't know. Back then, it might not have been so daunting.
Well, but that's the thing, because it was 2014 was when I ran, and Granbury had never had a partisan push for school board elections, and you ran because you wanted to serve, right? You wanted to give something back into the community, and that's why I was doing it. But that was the first time Granbury had actually moved their municipal type elections to November. First time ever. And so it became a very politically driven thing, not by myself or the other candidate I was running against for school board, but by the folks around it, including our state senator, Brian Birdwell. His wife was actually the one funding my opponent, which he was a great guy. We won't belabor that one too much, but that's where some of the politics around school boards really started to come out, with folks, touring through the local Republican club, literally announcing that school board is what we have to take over. If we want to control where education and where the youth are going to go in the future, we have to control school boards, of which I hadn't heard any of that, right? I was just a dad who, had coached my kids and ran this, and it was like, oh my gosh. And I can remember coming home to talk to Mendi after that meeting and being just horrified at what was happening. But I won the election, right? I got the opportunity to serve, which was great. But while I was there, started seeing our Texas, newly elected member of the Texas legislature in the Texas House, a gentleman named Mike Lang, told us when he was running, he was pro-public education and would be supporting our schools. And we as a board took him at his word. And once he got to Austin and started voting on bills, we did things as a board where you inform, hey, this is a bill would love for you to support. This is one to stay away from. Every time voted against the things that we were asking, hey, support our public education. Was voting for things like vouchers that never made it through, but he was consistently voting, again, against public education. So I couldn't figure out why he was doing some of these things. And so money was the only thing I could come up with. So I went to the Texas Ethics Commission, started downloading reports, putting them into spreadsheets because that's how my brain works, is spreadsheets, and saw some crazy numbers and showed them to Mendi. And Mendi looked at me and flat out told me, this is spreadsheets. This is just numbers and rows and things. And so to help her understand what I was seeing, I turned it into a pie chart, taking all the money and setting it up to where you could see visually. There was 3 different entries on his chart that was around 75% of the money he had taken in for his election. That was coming from, again, three different names, three groups. And that's why we knew he wasn't voting for public ed that we were asking for, because we weren't one of those 3 slices. So I started posting my pie chart on Facebook and Twitter at the time, and people all over the state started saying, hey, my rep's not listening either. He's telling us one thing and voting the opposite way. Your pie chart looks really bad. Can you make one for me? So I started literally downloading report, and starting putting them together and putting them out there for folks, and kind of became something of a campaign finance watchdog at the state level, but really focused in on public education, because that was the space I knew. That was the space I had served. And what you saw was a lot of these folks were very much aligned in trying to devalue, tear down public education in the state. And so that was, again, 2016, 2017 is when I really started doing that, and haven't stopped and continued to refine it. But I think, so the what was happening was, again, handful of billionaires, and I'm sure we'll touch on the specifics of them as we run. But they were trying to influence and buy the state. And I talked about it, and a lot of other folks did. But I think that's where some of the bona fides come from, is doing this for a whole bunch of years at this point. And I think Mendi's got some of the why.
Well, so as Chris had run for school board, yes, we were seeing some real abnormalities from what we had been used to and the way local government functioned, and this blurring of the line of separation between church and state, besides the money that Chris was uncovering, for our elected leader. We were also seeing some things happen within local government that were quite unusual to us. There in 2015, we had a book ban challenge at the county library there over some LGBTQ books that were in the kids section. We saw a lot of, as a group of us went to support our rock star local librarian who was fighting it at the time. We were going to county commissioner meetings, to push back. What we noticed was there was this a large segment of the church community and pastors who were showing up to say, no, the library needs to work the way we feel like it morally should work. That was unusual to us. And I'm never going to say that Granbury's not always been a conservative community. We were both raised there. It's always been a very church-centered, conservative Christian community. But that was abnormal. Our rock star librarian won that, so that was exciting at the time. But that was kind of one of the beginnings of, seeing. The other thing was we were seeing these voter engagement events happen locally with people like Raphael Cruz, Ted Cruz's father, David Barton, who runs the Wall Builders organization. They were coming through town and running these voter engagement events that were what we later understood was Christian nationalism. They were very Christian nationalist centered, right? Telling voters that government should be very Christian values centered, and that basically conservative Christians are the only ones who ought to be running government. We also had the local pastor council in one of the school board races down the line was taking out ads in the newspaper saying that only conservative Christians ought to be running for school board, and that, people who felt like they fit that bill should reach out, and the local pastor council would help them with making sure that they were elected. Dave Welch, who was the head of the National Pastor Council and had been for Texas for some time, he had come to town to support the bathroom bill when Tex Ledge took that up. And he was talking to the local Chamber of Commerce to get local businesses to push for support within the community, to lean in on our House rep and senator, which it didn't take any leaning in for them, but to get them to support the bathroom bill as that was working its way through the Texas legislature. These types of things were unusual. And I started listening to some of these church sermons that were happening and the voter engagement events, and I started attending some of those in person. And it was really jaw-dropping and eye-opening, the kind of rhetoric that was being espoused and the ideology that was being pushed. Raphael Cruz stood in churches in our town and told people that the separation of church and state was a myth, and that public schools were indoctrinating kids. And that's been, years and years ago that he did this at this point. So this isn't anything new. It's just that, what we're experiencing today isn't anything new. But they have seen now a significant level of success in their Christian nationalist messaging and the wins that they have gotten. And people didn't understand that at the time or know it.
Yeah, I think you guys were definitely in early kind of recognizing some of these signs, because back then most people were not seeing it and not doing anything about it if they did see it, or thinking that it was just happening in Granbury maybe and not something that would affect them personally. I think we're finding a lot nowadays that people get activated when it starts to affect them personally. So coming out of starting to share some of this information with folks, what have you seen as far as reaction to that, and changes that might have occurred, or how has that steered the direction you've gone just from sharing, and then sharing what other people have asked you to look into regarding other folks and the funding that they've received?
Well, I think the big thing is when we started talking about all of this, connecting not only the money, right, which is to me the what, but to the why of why all this is happening. There was a point where people looked at us like we had three heads, right? We were using a term like Christian nationalism, and people immediately took it as an attack on their faith, which is certainly not the intent of the term, right? It's not to say everybody who's a Christian is a Christian nationalist, but there are definitely Christians who ascribe to this idea of elevating one version of religion above anything else in this country. So there was a lot of conversations that we had to show up for and talk about. But it really changed, I think, with people paying attention on January 6th, right? Because the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, there's no denying it was driven by Christian nationalism. When you look at the symbols that were leveraged, the dialogue that was there, it was all connected into Christian nationalism. Now, lots of others got involved in leveraging it, as they could. But from that point forward, people started listening a lot closer. And the fact that we had seen it and been talking about it and had a personal story to be able to relate to it, I think made a difference to start making more inroads. Look, CNN did a documentary called Deep in the Pockets of Texas. That's one that, Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram had told the CNN producing team to contact me because I'd been talking so much about this connection of money and where things were going. And so, that documentary really came from conversations that I had with that team, and they did a tremendous job putting it together. And so if folks haven't seen that one, it's a great primer. What I'd like to tell people is, look, but that was the tip of the iceberg, right? That's the thing that activates your awareness. And then you got to get ready to go down the rabbit hole because there's so much more to talk about. But it has been this ongoing awareness for folks. But it's still one of those where there's so many people who, until it does impact them, they'll dismiss pieces of it. They'll kind of excuse away elements of it. And, unfortunately, we're at a point with the way things have continued to go, the attacks on public education, just the last few weeks of our federal government. It's all of these things are connected, and more people are paying attention to what's going on and starting to understand the real impacts of what we can see happen because of this movement and this ideology and just how connected it is broadly.
What is that impact that you see that can happen that you just kind of were getting to? Like I think a lot of people are seeing the last 2 weeks. I don't know how you guys feel. I imagine you guys are getting more calls like, wow, I'm interested. I'm now getting it. What is your big concern now that they've gotten this far in Texas and in the country?
Well, from a federal level, Mendi read Project 2025, all 900
pages.
All 900 pages, yeah. And the things that they were looking to do there is, tear down the protections of government, privileging certain folks. I mean, that's absolutely what we see happening. And that's nothing more than an extension of what we have seen by some of the leading advocacy groups in Texas. The folks that wrote Project 2025, Kevin Roberts, who's the head of the Heritage Foundation, ran the Texas Public Policy Foundation in Austin for a number of years. The and right before he left in 2021, he wrote a fundraising letter for the Texas Public Policy Foundation saying, this is the time for us to go after public education. This is the time to force these education savings accounts throughout, right? Blaming our public schools for CRT and Marxism and indoctrination and porn in libraries. I mean, all the things that have played out over the last legislative session and all the special sessions and where we're heading now, it's all been part of the plan. And they're finally have hit critical mass at a federal level. But they've absolutely been there and have kind of removed the guardrails at the state level as well. So if you liked the way your schools had functioned in the past, it may not work exactly the same way as we run forward. If you like the way your government worked at the federal level, you're not going to have some of those same supports that you've had in the past. And I mean, look, you don't want to be too hyperbolic, but the things that are happening, anybody who has relied on the government for anything, you don't know if it's going to be there anymore.
I think you mentioned hitting critical mass in people in seats that are supportive of some of the things that are leading to the vouchers and the dismantling of the way that things have been done thus far. That was happening through like primarying anybody who was opposed to these things in the last legislative session, correct?
Yes.
And so they have succeeded in that, right?
Absolutely, they did.
And I still see some folks out there who claim to be conservative who have attach themselves or agree with some of the concerns about vouchers and how it's going to take money out of public schools and are still opposed to it. But do you see that they have gotten everything that they need in order to get vouchers through? Because I keep hearing from folks that are like, there's nothing we can do at this point. And I'm hoping that's not the case, because I would love for there to be something that people can do still to voice their opinion. And I think a lot of people feel like if they think that their representative has already made their decision, that they just don't contact. And I always encourage folks to contact. But do you see a path to still having some sway in this?
If you just look at the way those who were reelected voted the last time around for vouchers, right, where they were supporting various aspects of it, and those who voted against, and again, we're really talking about the Texas House, because the Texas Senate, they're in for vouchers, right? There's no doubt that's going to happen. But for those who had voted against vouchers or weren't supportive, there were enough of those flipped that as long as everybody stays in the lane they were in before, vouchers will pass. You know, you don't know what format, right? Maybe there's some negotiated spot that's not as bad as it could be, but based on, again, previous voting patterns and those who got elected to replace those who may have voted against vouchers, the numbers would be there as long as everything stays.
So then the focus needs to be on the negotiations that are happening about what the vouchers would entail and include and
potentially
exclude.
I mean, there's nothing, there's no harm in saying, look, let's understand the real impact that vouchers will have. Maybe that will sway someone who had voted for the voucher previously. Right. But that's really the only way. I mean, look, in November, there were opportunities for Democrats to potentially win some of those seats, right, outside the primaries. But we saw the way the November election went, and broadly across the state and across the country, right? It's not just a Texas thing. Turnout for Democrats wasn't where it needed to be, which resulted in seats not flipping and policies that were very clearly part of the Republican Party, right? This push for vouchers is core. It just makes it that much more likely it's going to happen. And at the federal level, right, they're talking about doing everything they can. The new executive order that just got signed at the end of the week was about federal voucher components.
What is the if the money's the what, Christian nationalism is the why. What is vouchers to this process for them?
Well, I mean, it's I think it's a couple of different things. Number one, if they can divert money to religious education, within private schools, that's definitely what they want to see, right? There's money to be made, and as much as they scream and shout about indoctrination, that is what they're looking to do. The other side of that is, yes, we have seen the fight on vouchers here in Texas, but there are other bills, laws now that have been passed, which are very Christian nationalist in nature, that if you don't have vouchers, you're at least injecting that religious portion into, or that religious legislation into public schools. Chaplains passed. In God We Trust passed. These anti-trans bills on, sports and that focus on sports and bathrooms and that kind of stuff. We're going to see the Ten Commandments come back up. All of these kinds of bills are meant to be the other side of, if I can't get public dollars directly into private Christian schools, I'm going to put the Christianity into public schools. And what people have sometimes overlooked, not sometimes, I mean, I just have to be honest about it, they always seem to overlook, is that even these Republicans that voted no on vouchers, they all voted for these other bills, right? In God We Trust, chaplains in schools, they all voted for that. So those Republicans are all responsible for the Christian nationalist legislation that is now law for public education in Texas. And, I will be interested to see how some of these folks, I'm certain that In God We Trust is coming back up, or not In God We Trust, but Ten Commandments is coming back up.
That's in the top 25 of
Absolutely.
his priorities.
Absolutely. And so, I think it's imperative for people, the voting public, to not only make their voices heard about vouchers, because that is obviously still incredibly important. I mean, nothing's a done deal until it's a done deal, even though we kind of know the lay of the land. But they need to hear pushback on things like the Ten Commandments in schools as well. And even the anti-voucher Republicans, the handful of those, they need to hear, do not vote for the Ten Commandments to be in our public schools. Because, those people voted for book bans, they voted for chaplains, they voted for In God We Trust. They're also responsible for that Christian nationalist legislation, and they get let off the hook all the time for that.
For supporting those other things, which is just the back way to get into having those things.
Well, because I think when you think about vouchers themselves, right, they're from the beginnings of what I would call the modern movement on vouchers, it's rooted in racism. I mean, Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, immediately after that, which desegregated schools, right? Immediately after that, you see folks like Milton Friedman and others advocating for vouchers, right? To be able to get kids who are now in desegregated schools out of those and moved into, whether it's segregation academies that were there across the South. Texas had one in 1957, a voucher bill that passed the Texas House that was designed to give the equivalent of an ESA, right, education savings account or a voucher, to white families who did not have access to a whites-only campus in their community. Now, the Texas Senate filibustered it. It didn't pass, right? But that was the beginnings. It was firmly rooted in race all the way back into the 1950s. And the whole voucher movement kind of lost steam right? Because it was all about race. And there were a lot of people in a lot of parts of the country who were like, yeah, we can't support that. It started to shift as you got into the late 70s, early 80s, and they started involving some of the communities of color, the socioeconomically challenged ones, to say, hey, this is your chance to get your kids out of a failing public school system, right? And we've absolutely had issues in the public education system in certain communities. And that movement in Texas, at least, translated not into vouchers, but into charter schools, right? That became the venue because they couldn't get vouchers. Charters became a really big focus to try and make money, right? They couldn't really indoctrinate because the charters couldn't play in as much of the religious space. But there was absolutely money to be made. And so people took advantage of it and dove into it. But racism is at the core of this voucher movement, and the things we're looking at today, the Christian nationalism and the Venn diagram, when you're talking about racism and white supremacy and those kind of things, there's a really heavy overlap in some of the things that go along with this. There are, people who will play into the space to try and take advantage, right? Hey, we're not in this for religion. We're not in this for race, but I want to make money. That's a piece of it. But I think for anybody who's pushing vouchers, not somebody who's choosing to take one, right? Because families will make their choice for their kid every time if they feel like there's a better avenue. But the people who create these systems and drive these, they're always, and it's been the same since 1954, right? It's all about imposing religion, making money, or it's about race, right? And the again, Venn diagrams for any individual could play in one, two, or all three of those spaces, but that's what's driving all of this, and a lot of it's connected. Again, the Christian nationalism is money and power and indoctrination.
I mean, it seems like at times one of those three have not been, something that people could get behind, but in these times, it seems like the doors have been opened and it's okay to be behind all three of those things, which gives that so much more energy.
Yeah.
So it's
Chris, you've had a great recent post on y'all Substack about the money and how it's ballooned. Can you talk about the big players who maybe started, but now it looks like even more bigger players are showing that's coming from out of the state as well?
Yeah, well, a lot of the big initial push, and the one that folks have that deep in the pockets of Texas was Ferris Wilks and Tim Dunn, right? Oil and gas guys from Cisco, Texas and Midland, Texas. And they've absolutely been pushing, and Dunn's been the vice chair of the Texas Public Policy Foundation for better than a decade, right? Decade and a half. So tied into Heritage Foundation and Kevin Roberts and all of that. They've been absolutely big players who have been pushing this voucher fight for years, right? Empower Texans was one of their groups. Defend Texas Liberty was one of their groups. Texans United for a Conservative Majority is their current group that they're pushing. They've actively been pushing for vouchers from various spaces. What's interesting is this latest push, which really starts to involve some outside money, outside the state of Texas money coming in, really got started 2020 into 2021, where the American Federation for Children, which is Betsy DeVos's organization, created the Texas Federation for Children and started pouring money into the state, of which pouring money was a couple of $1 million, right? Which at the time was like mind blown, right? Now you had folks, Tim Dunn gave to that organization. A bunch of the Texans for Lawsuit Reform people all gave into that organization, which is inherently about a voucher organization. So David Weekley, H. Ross Perot, Robert Rowling. I mean, some big billionaire donors in the state of Texas pushing money into this space. with the DeVos money helping, direct where it was going. And that made a little bit of progress, but didn't go all the way. And then what we saw in this last legislative cycle, when they pushed for the vouchers, did the 4 special sessions, didn't get them, through that and then post that, a gentleman named Jeff Yoss with the Susquehanna Investment Group out of Pennsylvania dropped $18 million into Texas politics in the last 2 years. Most of it going to Greg Abbott. About 12 million went directly to Greg Abbott, who he then took that 12 million and spread it out to make sure the primaries went the way they wanted, right? Trying to create those spaces where people who voted against vouchers either decided not to run, right, and they backed somebody else, or, hey, they stayed in it and got pummeled with negative ads and things like that. And then Yost dumped another, so 12 million to Abbott, another 5, almost 6 million into the AFC Victory Fund, which was the American Federation for Children, right? So it's that continuation to the dollars we had seen before to do the same sort of a thing. But what was interesting is AFC Victory, when it did all of its ads attacking people who, again, were incumbents who had voted against vouchers, they didn't attack them for the voucher votes. They attacked them for being soft on crime, soft on the border, soft on guns. And these were some incredibly conservative lawmakers, right? Who, to Mendi's point earlier, had voted for a whole lot of other things that you could absolutely say were anti-public education. But it was all done to devalue these people and elevate others. So again, $19 million from a TikTok billionaire, because actually he's one of the largest investors in TikTok.
Well, it's interesting that nobody seems to have a problem with this outside money influencing our local Texas politics when it's on that side of the aisle. Because I know when some other progressives have run, they've always been accused of getting money from, liberal places, and that they're trying to, change Texas, but clearly
right,
it's not a problem in this instance.
Billionaires are bad unless there are billionaires.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is there any players from kind of the Christian nationalist movement outside of the money people that we should also be kind of aware about? And I'd be interested just knowing, like, I guess, what's the possible Venn diagram of billionaires, politicians, Governor Abbott, Dan Patrick, and them, and then like the Christian nationalist names or orgs. That what do we got there?
I'll say a lot of what you start to see from the Christian nationalist spaces isn't necessarily playing at the state level. They're really focusing in places like local government, right? Getting into school boards. Patriot Mobile, right, was one that made a big splash in 2022, going out and pushing to win all of these school board
Back to
races.
11 candidates.
Back to 11 candidates,
Yeah.
all 11 won, flipped 4 different school boards to their way of thinking inside that. And so that is a space where you start to see the influence, right? I mean, Rafael Cruz is the in-house pastor for Patriot Mobile. So Ted's dad, right? So that is a space where you really start to see the push. I mean, you've got like a Tim Dunn is absolutely involved in is a Christian, has Christian nationalist ideals, right, on what he wants to impose, and puts a lot of money in. But there's also so many folks that have seen kind of what they've done and how it worked and how it was successful. And they've absolutely worked to emulate it across the state at every level of government. You'll see these little PACs show up in these local races. And it's like, it's not the big billionaires who are funding these, but it's people who have seen what they did, are aligned with what they did, and are working to make sure that that set of ideologies gets imposed into our local communities, trusting that the bigger players are doing what they need to at the state level.
And I think it's not just school board races; it's
No.
city council races too.
It is absolutely trying to take over local government at large.
Yeah, I think in 2021 there were a couple of candidates on the Fort Worth ballot that aligned with those ideologies. Neither of them won, but they were there. And we highlighted the number of people that have filed in Fort Worth for the upcoming election in May. And there's 7 candidates that have filed for mayor. And I didn't do a whole overall count, but it would be, and I haven't dove into who all of these people are because some of them are names that I don't recognize, but that would be something to keep an eye on too, to see where these folks are. I mean, I think to your point about some of this stuff has been in the works since the 50s is what was really shocking to me. And I was like, this comes across as being so methodically inserted into with small gains over time and then things ebbing and flowing. But it's like literally people have been working to try to accomplish this for so long.
Absolutely.
And it seems overwhelming.
And the thing is, we still run across, and look, Chris and I cannot take credit for being like uncovering Christian nationalism. And we simply saw it in our community. And we started frantically searching for who are the experts who can tell us what to do and how to do. So there are people out there who have been researching this and documenting it and naming it for years and years and years. What folks in progressive and left-leaning spaces just, I think, haven't realized, because we didn't realize. We were living our lives. But all of a sudden it showed up on our doorstep in our hometown. And people in those left-leaning progressive spaces have not realized that there is this well-funded, well-oiled machine, political machine, that has been working at this for decades. And I mean, going back even to the Reagan years at the national level, that was a huge point of swinging the door open for these folks and giving them access. Rick Perry did it here in Texas. And people like to think of Rick Perry as being like, the reasonable type Republican that we used to have. But Rick Perry is one of the people that, went and did events with these folks and gave them legitimacy into the Texas Capitol and access to Austin. So people just haven't been aware that these relationships were being made and accessed by these Christian nationalist groups, far-right, religious groups, were gaining access over a number of years, and we didn't realize it. And now it's literally hitting us in the face, and unfortunately we're quite behind, not only on having a response to it, but just people being knowledgeable about it. Or, there's a lot of catch up is what I'm trying to say.
And man, so my question there is, obviously we're in tuned, and the people who listen to this podcast are hyper in tuned. Like, how niche are we still, do you think? Of like, if we walked up to 100 Texans, like how many do we think are aware of all this? I know we're really lost in it, but I'd be able to get your guys' perspective of just like how much more education and information we have to do across the state of Texas.
Well, I do think that there's still a lot of education that needs to occur.
Yeah.
I can say from the time that Chris and I started getting loud about it, which is almost a decade ago, we feel like we can see market improvement on coming across people who are familiar at least with the phrase Christian nationalism, or like regular media covering Christian nationalism. That's at least been part of the dialogue through this last election. But I don't think we're anywhere near that critical mass as far as the majority of people in America understanding how it impacts and how dire a situation we are in, and how much of a real threat it is to democracy. I mean, again, it's not that we want to sound hyperbolic, and we're simply, repeating the message of the folks who have been studying and working at this for so long to, make the public understand what it is. But it is not hyperbolic to say democracy is absolutely hanging in the balance, that it's on the line.
Yeah, it's like you said, you were just living your lives and then it came to your community. And I think there are a lot of people in a lot of communities that are just living their lives and it hasn't hit them yet.
When you talked about how many Texans would know about what we're talking about, I think the thing for me that I come back to is I look at almost 19 million registered voters in Texas, and 7.2 million chose not to vote in November, right? And when you understand Christian nationalism, you understand the stakes of what's at risk with government. And there's no way 7.2 million Texans, if they knew, would choose not to vote, right? And so to me, that says, look, we've got well over a third, pushing toward 40% of Texans that I guarantee you don't have any sense of it. And so and a lot of those who did vote, some were down with it, and they would be able to tell you what Christian nationalism is, or at least their version of it. You've got a bunch of others who voted for a Democratic Party, not necessarily understanding Christian nationalism, but that's what they always vote. And so that is an important thing that I come back to, is non-voting tells you have not gotten through to people with the importance of a message. And, to me, that says we've got so far still to go.
Yeah, that pie chart you share when you're talking about that is pretty daunting, to show the number of people who just sat it out.
I think it also shows in your financing of how much of the money's going to Republicans compared to the Democrats. Can you talk about that really quickly? Of just like, well, not quickly, but just like, it's also in the money.
No, if we look at the 23-24 election cycle, right, this last 2 years, and you look at just the billionaire oligarchs, right, who are playing in the state of Texas, and I identified, basically 14 who were giving millions of dollars into the state. When you start to filter it into the individual candidates and who they're supporting, $75 million of the oligarch money went to Republican candidates, and under $2 million went to Democrats. Now, again, that's $2 million of oligarch, different oligarchs potentially, money going in, but it just speaks to the imbalance, right, of what you're looking at, and the fact that Texas is one of just a handful of states with no limits on campaign finance contributions at the state level. So if I want to write you $1 million check, I can, and there's no rules against it. The billionaires have figured out that's how we make this work. You don't even have to hide it through dark money all the time. You just write the checks directly.
Yeah, I think there's no limits on local. I don't know about school board, but city council, there's no limits either.
Right. If there's going to be limits at a local level, it's up to the local body to set those.
Make those rules.
So absent that, you follow the state rules, which means it's the Wild West.
Yeah.
I understand we're on a money, we're behind on the money. We're behind on the communication of the situation. But so much of what to me is the hardest part is the identity of a Texan and like the culture of Texas. I grew up in Burke Burnett, Texas. You grew up in Granbury. You know the culture of West Texas people and rural Texas, just behavior. How do we, like, to me, I have a hard time figuring out, like, how did you guys, one, get to looking at each other in the eye and saying, "Oh shit, there's something here." Like that magic right there, to have you two doing this work for a decade, is so important to Texas. And I think whatever happened with y'all on that point, I just think more Texans need to see that it's okay. And like this is today. This isn't niche stuff we're talking about anymore. This isn't niche. This is serious. I think that conversation is the part that I feel like the hardest, even when we talk about what do we talk about on our podcasts, and how some of the people on our podcasts might call our podcast radical or super, just trying to, say crazy stuff. So yeah, just what you guys have done that for a decade. What was that like?
Well, look, I mean, we try not to say, too much about, oh, poor us or whatever, because I don't feel that way. We both feel like anything that we've experienced as kind of a backlash or losses because of speaking up about it has absolutely been worth it, because it's the right thing to do. I won't lie to anybody. I mean, yes, it has cost us a lot of relationships. Matter of fact, when we were leaving Granbury, there was a person that we have known for a whole lot of years who said in a public post, "Good riddance." You all used to be nice folks who, were just concerned about baseball and kids and stuff like that. And then you went and got all political. And there were a lot of people in town that we've known for most of our lives who felt that way. I mean, we know that. And yes, it cost us a lot of relationships, a few family relationships, and a whole lot of friend type relationships. And that was really hard. And for us, it's hard because it's heartbreaking to, realize what you thought you knew about people wasn't true, right? What you thought you knew them to be was quite different than what they ended up supporting or being behind or being, okay with the Christian nationalist type stuff in town. But it is absolutely worth it. And we hope that, we have gained a lot of other relationships from and met a whole lot of other people from talking about this, and people who genuinely care both about their own local community and our state, and the country as well. I mean, this affects local, state, and national politics and relationships and policy and all those things. So if for people who feel like democracy and representation of all people is important, and genuine religious freedom is important, not I'm free from everybody's religion but mine, which is kind of the religious freedom interpretation of the folks in the Christian nationalist movement. If you value those things, then it is imperative that those of us who do value those things collectively use our voices in a grassroots manner to push back, because that's really the strength that we have to beat this, is to be that lone voice in your community who is willing to step out and say, this is wrong. Because as soon as one person steps out and says this is wrong, you give a green light to other people to also step out with you and say this is wrong. And you make those connections, and then you become strength in numbers. And you don't win every fight, but you'll win a few. And it just gives more people the confidence who might have been totally silent and said nothing. It gives more people the confidence to step out and say, yeah, it's important that together we say this is not okay here.
And we can point to places where things have happened that have negatively impacted, so that people don't have to experience that themselves before they decide to step out and do it in their own communities. I know when the voucher discussion first started, there was a lot of rural communities that normally would have followed in line with maybe a more conservative voting way. But when they saw what vouchers would do in their own communities, because they would, gut public schools and all the things that they held dear about those public schools, and they didn't have private schools to go to or other options to go to, that kind of triggered for them, this is something that they needed to be concerned about. And I think having these conversations, I think, and you guys sharing how it's negatively impacted other communities helps people find the why for themselves and their own communities.
And I know each question I ask is its own podcast in itself, unfortunately, because so much of this is so many parts. So excuse all the different questions. I now want to pull us, for the listeners, is Tarrant County, Tim O'Hare, Bill Wayborn, Mercy Culture, Keller ISD. Where does Tarrant County, because, right, like, I think we saw some of this in rural Texas or Midland and Odessa, but now it's coming to the Metroplex, or it could have started in Metroplex based off of your guys, what you might say. What did you guys take on what's going on in Tarrant County? And what do Tarrant County residents and Fort Worthians need to know?
Well, the Metroplex, and specifically Tarrant County, is something of an epicenter because of leaders that have been in the movement broadly, are based here. I mean, it's definitely inside the Metroplex itself. But you've got like a David Barton and his Wall Builders organization, which is in Aledo, right? And he's been a player in Republican politics for a number of years. But this Wall Builders organization has absolutely pushed this Christian nationalist, schools indoctrinating kids, those kind of things. With Rafael Cruz, right? He's been playing in this space for years at this point. There's a gentleman named Lance Wallnow who lives in Keller, Texas. And we haven't even touched on some of, folks like Lance Wallnow, who is an advocate for this thing called Seven Mountains Dominionism, which is incredibly scary. And it's truly the thing that, when I look at what animates Christian nationalism, this dominionist ideology is kind of what animates all of it, right? And makes it go, which again could be its own podcast to dive into that kind of stuff. But he's in the Keller area. And so you've got a lot of these leaders inside the movement, especially in that religious space of it here in North Texas, who have been driving at this point for decades, right? Trying to pull these things forward, who have had the ear when the 2016 election happened and folks didn't necessarily expect it. Those folks got ear of the president as they went through, were horribly disappointed that they lost access to power in 2020. And so all of this gear up with folks like a Tim O'Hare, right? With Matt Krause, being elected into that space, are all part of that movement that got some power, again, federally, got power in Tarrant County, when O'Hare got elected as county judge, but had come kind of out of that, South Lake, Grapevine, Colleyville spaces. And you do have folks like a Nate Schatzline who is connected into, again, the ideology, this idea of taking over every lever of government. They are trying to turn Tarrant County into this utopia type space for their ideology. I mean, they are running people in every single race trying to get more power. The county commissioner space with Matt Krause coming in, tying with O'Hare, with, others that are, again, all connected into these same groups, all supported by the same things. It's nothing more than what we see happening in Washington right now, with this consolidation of power, handing the keys to certain things to people that you're already connected to. We're seeing exactly the same thing happen in our county government. As we look at what's going to be happening for the city council races, we know they're going to be coming to try and gain seats there with everybody up, ready to go. The school board, Fort Worth ISD, Keller ISD, all of these different spaces, they're trying to make sure that those aligned with the ideology are the ones dictating what happens to all residents of Tarrant County. And if you believe in religious freedom, if you believe in the rights of just people generally who want to live their lives, the risk is that all gets backburnered and you won't have the opportunity to live the life you want to live. They're going to dictate how you live it.
Well, and I just want to add, as people hear like Matt Krause and Nate Schatzline, and people think, well, how are they tied into this? Like Matt Krause was a speaker, or has been a speaker for Wall Builders with David Barton's. It's a Dominionist organization, right? It's not just Christian nationalism; it is Seven Mountains Dominionism. Nate Schatzline with who is a state representative. He is also with the Mercy Culture Group. The Mercy Culture Church was a church plant out of Gateway Church. And, the head pastor at Gateway Church was on Trump's religious advisement team, right? So, and it's hard for people to know all of these relationships or what's the backstory, why do I need to be worried about this particular elected official? But I think that is something that is imperative for people to, especially at a local level, to start looking a little more closely at, is do a little more homework about who these folks are. Go and pull, local campaign finance reports when they are filed, because you kind of need to see where is their funding coming from, or do a little more research on where have these folks been, or what kind of relationships have they held in the past, because that kind of gives you a roadmap on what should I expect, because there are a lot of these people that may say some things that don't sound all that bad, or they will tamp it down and make it sound somewhat reasonable. Now I'm not saying Nate Schatzline ever sounds reasonable, but there are some of these people who try to make it look less bad at surface level than what it is.
Yeah,
but
depending on their audience.
That's right. And so that is why it is important to understand some of the backstory and relationships on these folks, and where that helps people know where is it they're trying to take us.
And do you have suggestions on where people go to get this information? Your information about people's finances is a great resource, so people should definitely tap into that. But I think to the point of the huge numbers of people who don't vote, I think part of the reason that some people don't vote is the overwhelming need to have done research to be an educated voter. And we're here telling them you need to even research more. And so if we can find some easier resources for people to tap into to learn these things about people, so that these connections can be more easily followed by the average voter who is not spending so much time digging into it all.
Well, I do think it's important for people to, with any of these news outlets, whether it's, the Texas Tribune or Texas Monthly, or, any of, even at a national level, if there is a religion reporter, follow that person and read their work. There are folks like Robert Downen, who is doing incredible work on reporting on this kind of stuff and trying to put it out there for all Texans to have access to. There's a whole bunch of additional reporters, journalists that are reporting on this kind of stuff than there used to be even 5 or 6 years ago. So I think it's important. The Texas Observer always has really great articles. Here locally in Tarrant County, Fort Worth Report does a ton of really good reporting on these types of issues. And they still try to stay unbiased, but give people facts. And I think it's important for people to really plug into those types of articles when they're available.
What if, I think the other big piece too is there, like you said earlier, Chris, about there's some people who go to normal Texas churches that aren't Christian nationalists, but how would one know? Like, what are some tips to a Texan who's like, okay, well, I go to a church here. Like, how do I know I'm in trouble or if I'm good? I'm with good people.
Well, if your pastor is standing at the pulpit and actively talking about politics, that's generally not a great sign, right? We talked about, mentioned, Mercy Culture and the connection to Gateway Church. And I mean, those are churches that every time there is an election comes up, have their friends and family, listings. They've done it every year for the last several, where they're bringing political candidates on stage. They are naming them and not telling anyone to vote for them because that would violate the Johnson Amendment, doing it from the pulpit, but just saying that they want you to be aware that these are folks who are out there and, that we should be, praying for all candidates, but we just want you to know, if your uncle was running, you'd want to know that he was running for office, I mean, so as soon as you hear them talking about the politics and specific candidates and things like that, I mean, that's got to be the biggest kind of red flag that you are actively in a place that is pushing a Christian nationalist ideology. A lot of the things that you start to dive into, whether it's things like it's the culture war elements, right? If those are being talked about from the pulpit, whether it's attacks on transgender people, the LGBTQ community, it's talking about pornography in your public school libraries, right? I mean, those are all things where you're dealing with faith leaders who are working to be political activists. And when you see those things start to show up, that should give you pause and start to reevaluate, is this the place for me?
Well, and I'll give you a couple of examples here locally. Back in 2016, a group of churches in Granbury did at the 2016 election did a multi-week, a 4-week sermon series called One Nation Under God, leading up to the 2016 election, right? Now, they all claimed that it wasn't partisan, it wasn't, but when you went back and listened to those sermons, it was quite clear who and where they were trying to direct people to. And, Stonewater Church in particular, flat out with a whiteboard, preached Seven Mountains Dominionism in part of that sermon series, and that they were encouraging people to get out, and vote. Again, locally here, you've seen churches like Gateway and Mercy Culture hold these pre-election Sunday sermons where they're saying, we're not telling anybody who to vote for, but we just want folks to know who's part of our church family, who's running, and when you want to vote for people who are in your family. So that is it. Churches are always going to preach politics in a way because caring about people is politics. That's political, right? You may have one interpretation or you may have another interpretation. But when it comes to a church just really flat out telling you how to vote, even though I know they're saying they're not telling you how to vote, that's pretty concerning.
What are some things that we can start doing as people to fight against this or be at least aware if it's happening around our schools and our communities?
Well, I think the big thing we need to see is people being very vocal about the good things happening in their public school systems. One of the reasons why we see this push toward vouchers is being embraced a little more broadly than it had been in the past is people, when you looked at, national surveys and people talking about public education, it's usually in the mid 70s to low 80s when you talk about my schools, my kids' education. People have historically been very positive about it. When you talk about public education on the whole, you see survey scores that come back around the high 40s, low 50s, right? And that's where they play in the voucher space. The things that we've seen happen over the last, we'll call it decade, right? But it's really multiple decades of work, has been to devalue public education, right? This whole idea of CRT and, they're indoctrinating kids, all of that is designed to make people scared to send their kids to their public school. And I think it's easy to get caught in this doom loop of, oh no, this is awful, and oh, maybe I shouldn't send my kid to a public school. And I think we've got to get louder about the great things happening in our schools to help people understand, look, we know there's no porn in the libraries, right? We know the teachers in our schools are good people because our kids are good people. And we want these good things to happen for them. And if we don't continue to have our neighborhood schools, all of a sudden, the critical thinking that we value for our children, the trajectory we want them to be on, starts to get jeopardized a little bit. So moving that narrative on support for public education, I think we've got to be noisy with it. And we've really got to be involved. And look, show up where you can and give public comment, right? At your school board meeting. They aren't always a circus. They can become
that is off-putting to a
circus.
lot of people. And I
Right.
tend to tell people, if you don't feel comfortable going and showing up in person, send emails with
Absolutely.
your position, because that gives those elected officials something to point to of support for the thing that maybe they don't want to go and face.
Yeah.
The clown show that often happens.
But there is a spectrum of things that you can do to support your public schools, to support your city council, to support your county commissioners who, are doing the right things, or at least trying to. I think, that's got to be a space as we recognize what's happening. People have to get more comfortable with their voice. And putting it out there. And it may be a post on Facebook or, Blue Sky or wherever it is you feel like you want to put it out there. But it's also making sure you are being visible in the community in whatever space that may be. And look, if you're in a faith community that is leaning into some negative spaces, also be willing to ask some questions on, why are we doing this? Why are we playing into that space? And I think Mendi touched on it, earlier, this idea of it takes grassroots to drive real change. Because one of the things we've seen as we've gone through all of this is we kept waiting for somebody to come save us, right? Whether it was in Granbury, whether it's in these other spaces. And the reality is there's not somebody coming to save us, right? It's up to all of us to make a decision that, this isn't okay. And when you do start to take that step, you do find community inside that. And one voice isn't going to carry very far, but you get a whole bunch of voices, and now we have a chorus. And now people have to listen a little closer to what we have to say. And I think that's the space we've got to get to, is we've got to get people very comfortable using their voice to support public schools, to support our community, to support positive developments in where we're trying to go, right? It's really having vision for who we want ourselves to be, and making sure we're working together to bring that to reality.
Well, and I would add, again, I'm going to go back to, people need to be doing some of their own research and informing their circle of influence about what they know. If it's a local race, right? Go file the paperwork needed. It's just a short form to get the campaign finance information about who's running. Just know that, right? Know who these people are getting their money from. Because the folks who are putting in money that are bad actors on this and are wanting to inject Christian nationalism and authoritarianism into our local spaces, they're counting on us not knowing. They're counting on us not going to look it up and never knowing about their money. And they're counting on us not connecting dots so that they're riding under the radar and they get exactly what they want. So it's imperative that regular people like us go out and make some noise about that. Do that research. And at a state level, I would say, as much as I appreciate the fact that there's a handful of Republican legislators, House members specifically, who have pushed back on vouchers, I'm going to call them out on that's the only thing you've pushed back on. So don't tell me that you are against Christian nationalism and you're against the ideology that some of these oligarchs want to inject into our state when you voted for you didn't just vote for it. Sometimes you filed the legislation, right? And you participated in perpetuating Christian nationalism in this state on all the other fronts. And I think the public needs to hold those folks accountable for that too, because vouchers are not the only issue in Christian nationalism and authoritarianism in this state. And so those Republicans, as great as it is, and I'll continue to be like, yay, please fight vouchers. But you can't stop there. And if you are genuinely telling me that you're against Christian nationalism, be about it at every turn. You can personally feel as conservative in your Christianity as you want to. But as soon as you start deciding that your conservative Christianity needs to be my life needs to be run by your conservative Christian law, then we have a problem. Because somebody else's religion directly contradicts your conservative Christian viewpoint. And how are you going to feel when their religion is making a law, based on that religion? So I want people to hold those Republican legislators accountable for all of the votes they're taking and not just turn them into heroes because of vouchers alone.
And that they're not as bad as they could be. Because it's basically giving them a pass and saying, oh, they're okay because they're not doing this extreme thing that these other folks are doing over here.
Or they are kind of doing an extreme thing, but they're just not publicly acting foolish.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times that's what we see, right? That's what we saw in Granbury on the school board is, it turned into this circus after the fact on the superintendent that was down there and the book bans, which we were very, very involved in. Chris really drove that investigation. It kind of became this circus after the fact, and people focused on the extreme Christian nationalist folks who were showing up to the school board meetings. But then they turned all the school board members who supported the superintendent and voted, on things to perpetuate the book ban stuff, they turned them into heroes, like they were fighting it. And it's like, no, you just reelected the people who made all this happen. That's what we see happening at both a local and a state level. And it's so frustrating because it's a much bigger, deeper story than just vouchers.
Everybody gets myopic and focuses on one aspect and loses the bigger picture to understand what else is happening.
Well, I know it all started with school boards for you, right? You jumped for the school board. And then you even mentioned that the plan was, to take education, we need to get on school boards. But it sounds like today what we really want to end with is that it seems like that is also something that we should be, from the other side, be taking more seriously, as well as an option to fight against what's going on. Is school boards?
Yeah. I mean, school boards is one of those places where if you are looking for that space that a lot of people agree, right, that we want strong schools. The public schools and school boards are that continued space that one group wants to gain control of. And those of us who believe in public education, we've got to be involved. Otherwise, our schools won't look the way we want them to, right? They won't truly be what we believe they're capable of, right? They'll never be able to achieve that. And so whether it's trying to hold the line against some of the things that may come out of Austin, where you're trying to make sure you're protecting the kids and the ideas of diversity that so many of us value in our communities, being involved in the public school system, whether it's the PTA or it's running for school board, things like that, we've got to have the right people who are willing to stand up and talk about what they believe in and why the public school system is so important to them. We've got to have those voices that are showing up, serving on that dais, shaping the superintendents that are being hired, making sure that we are those places that kids come to where they feel safe. The other side is coming to change that. And we've seen some districts that have marginalized kids, marginalized staff inside those spaces from diverse voices. We've got to make sure that's not going to continue, right? Stop it in its tracks and hopefully start to work backwards. So whether it's the school board elections, Fort Worth ISD or any of the other districts across Tarrant County, it's going to be essential for us to make sure we are putting people, running people, and hopefully electing people to school board who can be those voices for our kids in our communities.
Look, I want to just put this in real quick, is that there is a reason that the far right has made schools, public schools, such a centerpiece of their targeting. Public schools are the beginnings of democracy in this country. That's where kids go to be in a space that is not homogenous, and you learn critical thinking, and we work together, and it's about community. And everybody in that community is represented and reflected and included in a public school. They are the forefront of democracy in this country, I think. And I don't think it's any question why the far right has targeted what is at the forefront of democracy in this country, which is public schools. So it is up to us to, follow their lead and take it seriously, that it's worth protecting. We protect democracy when we protect public education, in our communities. And that is important. They're doing that for a reason.
Well, I know there is a possible event happening with Alex at the Catalyst Project in February, where if people are interested in getting more involved in the school boards, do you have details or insights of what that could look like?
Yeah, we're looking at the 13th of February, 6 to 8 p.m. I'm sure you guys will have some of the details around that. But the whole idea is just to get folks who are interested in running, help them understand what it might take to run, how to really think about all of this and understand the things that come with it, but also to stress just how important it is, and that it is going to take folks, coming out. So if you're interested, we would love to see you get registered for it. And, it's a 2-hour session from like 6 to 8 o'clock, collaborative, where we'll be talking and working through things. But I know for myself, right, when I decided to run in 2014, I jumped into this thing not knowing anything. And the idea of having a space where I could go and ask questions and help kind of get my head right before I dove into it would have been hugely valuable. So really excited we're going to be able to do that for folks who may have some interest.
Awesome. Well, you guys can check out that event. They will be in the links. We thank the Tacketts for joining us today. Please also check out their Substack. It's a long name, so I'm going to let you say it for me.
Well, I would say if you go to seeitnameit.fightit.com, we've got links to the Substack and a whole lot of other information and the things that helped us learn of everything we're dealing with. So yeah, seeitnameit.fightit.com.
And we have used, since y'all started doing that, a part of our pod as articles to allow us to discuss and things. So just the work you guys do has been helpful for us to even do our work. We see you guys as citizen journalists, and I think we need more of that effort. So thank you guys for doing that.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Well, there you guys have it. Chris and Mendi Tackett joined us on the pod. What a fruitful conversation. And now we're going to move into wins and losses. We start with our losses and then leave you guys with wins.
So usually I have a hard time finding losses, but as you pointed out to me when I was struggling to come up with one today, pick your hate. There's so many. So I decided to try to keep it a little bit local. And as I said before, I've been trying not to just be triggered by every single executive order that is coming out of our federal government. But recently, our lieutenant governor outlined his sweeping conservative agenda with a list of his top 25 legislative priorities. And I would say that these focuses are not my focuses. I disagree with a lot of them, and I think that they are not prioritizing the things that we should be prioritizing in this state. So overall, my loss is these top 25 agenda items that our lieutenant governor has decided to prioritize in this brief every 2 years legislative session that they have before them.
Yep, a lot of stuff like stopping drag time story hour is bill number 18. That's one of the most important things Texas need to worry about, not affordable housing or
transportation other than highways.
Yep, there's a lot of crazy stuff on this list.
Placing the 10 commandments in schools, protecting freedom of prayer in schools.
Yep. So mine just kind of, my loss kind of rolls as it is federal. It's because I just think that, again, what you saw in the inauguration of Donald Trump, he took credit for everything. He said, TikTok, me, right? Even TikTok's, lousy behind gave him the credit. All the rich power brokers, oligarchs kissed the ring. In 2016, they made fun of him. In 2020, they kissed the ring. And then you had the Ukraine, Russia, and him trying to say, he's the one who's going to make peace there. He took credit for the ceasefire in Gaza. He takes credit for things that have already happened. And his entire letter about the priorities we need to do, he's passed down an economy, energy, safety. Those things are already here in America. And so when we have 15 years of free and safe skies with airplanes in our country, 15 years, then you have an American airline flight hits a helicopter that's a federal funded helicopter. All of this happens after you tell all the Doge government efficiencies to lay off people. You release people from committees that are important to TSA. You freeze funding, and then what happens is there's a miscommunication, not just any random place in the world, in Washington, D.C. And so I'm not going to get conspiracy and say this happened because of Trump. But what I will say is that if you're going to take credit for TikTok, the odds of TikTok being online and this happening, which one you had more sway in or influence in, you have to be able to take the blows. And so therefore you then blame DEI and the future of this country that is majority non-white people is disgraceful, Pete Buttigieg says it's despicable. You have families that you should be leading, and instead you are lying. And if anyone is not, again, worked up, name your poison. What's the thing that pisses you off? It's time to get up out of the seats, find an organization, find something you can be active in, and make sure that people like Donald Trump and the people who are backing him don't allow it to take this country where what you see as Texas priorities becomes the nation's priorities. So let's do something about it. My win is the MP Materials is going to elevate a building magnet factory in Fort Worth. This work is a new factory that will produce magnets that are expected to support 500,000 EV motors. This is a partnership that's already been, like, there was some success. This is an alliance-based company. And so, like, this just shows you the success of an alliance and success of MP Materials. This is also important because MP Materials owns and has one of the only rare earth mines, and it's in California. The company acquired Mountain Pass in 2017. The new plant at Alliance, Texas will enable U.S. to have an onshore and in the supply chain for imports of this kind of production, because this allows us to diversify and have a domestic pathway to these things. We talk about unleashing energy, and Donald Trump's going to unleash energy. Energy has already been unleashed in Texas. Another great example of that is that on January 24th, windmills plus solar power provided 68% of all power in Texas. With a wholesale price of $3 per megawatt hour, this is cheap, abundant domestic energy at its finest. It's our sun, it's our wind. When you look at who took advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act, Texas is above everyone else. We are showcasing what unleashing energy looks like. Again, kudos. Other things you won't ever hear is that Biden fracked and took more American oil out of the ground than any other president. But there's reasons why you wouldn't hear that, because that's not aligned with his party. So what I'm saying is energy is crushing, and that is a win that we can see that we are experiencing that with a future forward company like MP Materials right here in Fort Worth.
So my win is yesterday I had the privilege of attending a unveiling dedication of a new public art installation entitled East Rosedale Monument Project. The artist transformed a vintage transit bus into a public artwork as a way of talking about the history of buses in the civil rights movement and preserving that history. From the Montgomery bus boycotts and the Freedom Riders to the busing of students for integration, the transit bus has played a key role in fighting for justice and equality. Engraved panels within the bus shell focus on these stories along with others who protested the policies of segregation and fought for justice and equality here in Fort Worth. This monument also engages with the conversation about national monuments and which stories get to be canonized in the public sphere. So it's an incredible public art piece. It's one of my favorite in the whole public art collection at the city of Fort Worth. Probably because it has buses and public transportation components to it, but also just to highlight the fact that we have just begun Black History Month. And so this was a lovely way to start that celebration in a room that was completely packed. Like, there were so many people there. I've never seen so many people show up for the unveiling of a public art project. And I think this really resonates in that community and throughout the entire community of Fort Worth. And many of the comments that were shared at this celebration were supporting art and artists and the importance of doing that in our community at a time when, you know, they're not getting the support that they need. So we need to continue to work on resources and organizations and talented folks that are supporting the arts in our city, and hopefully have more similar celebrations in the future.
There you guys have it. A full long episode of the 817 podcast. We wanted to give you short stories on top of an interview because we know we missed these stories last week. So hopefully you enjoy all of it. Make sure to subscribe, share with a friend. The more people who are aware of these stories that we're hearing from people like Lainey and Chris, these are important for more people to hear this. So share the pod with people who need to know what's going on in this state. This state can be great. It can flourish. We have to change the dynamics of control and how our systems invest in our communities. So great way to end the show. Please subscribe, and we will see you guys next week on the 817 Pod.
Swipe, dopamine, swipe, dopamine,